When the Titans came upon the nascent world soul of Azeroth, it was on the verge of total corruption, but after a long war they managed to defeat and imprison the old gods. Cthulhu, the god of chaos, was locked away in a complex named Qiraji. Then, thousands of years later, the troll empire of Xol came into conflict with the Akiri legions of the old gods. After much blood was spilt, the Akir were pushed back, burrowing deep into the planet and going dormant. One Akir faction took up residence in the titanic prison of Cthulhu, and they became known as the Qiraji. Thousands of years later, and 1,000 years before the First War, Fandral Staghelm set out to make the deserts verdant once more, and to this end he sent his son and a band of druids to investigate. They found a long-lost Titan facility, and upon entering it, they awakened the Qiraji once again. In response, Fandral raised an army to challenge them, beginning the War of the Shifting Sands. The war was grim, with Fandral's son dying, but eventually the elves gained the aid of the bronze dragonflight. Thousands were lost, but the Qiraji were pushed back, and they were locked within the city. Of course, though, Cthulhu remained in Qiraji, and by the time Vanilla came along, he was becoming more active. And this threat was so significant that the Horde and the Alliance decided it was best to open the Scarab Gate and excise the old god. But before that, a great task needed to be completed. The materials of war would need to be gathered from across Azeroth, leading to one of the greatest events the game would ever see. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the complete history of World of Warcraft, the series where we chronicle WoW's life as a live game. And this series is brought to you by our patrons who get episodes a week early, with our next episode being up there right now, along with bonus features, early videos, behind-the-scenes content, and physical loot. This month, it is Death Knight month, but we're also doing an art book. Yeah, an art book. It's a big bunch of stuff for $25. This show would not be possible without them, and we thank them for their support. And with that, let us begin. The War Materials drive at its core was a series of grinds, but the numbers were of such a magnitude that they brought a massive sense of scale to the war. Both sides would have to gather sums as high as 90,000 copper bars, 26,000 purple lotus, and 400,000 rune cloth bandages. Then each faction would have their own set of war materials to hand in. This included 24,000 thorium bars, 600,000 silk bandages for the Alliance, and then 19,000 fire bloom and 250,000 mage weave bandages for the Horde. Now, each hand-in was rewarded with a supply box, and this would contain green items and stat scrolls, but you'd also get commendation signets, and these could be used either for faction reputation or handed in for superior supply boxes. As you can see, it's a truly gargantuan amount of resources, and clearly the server economies were about to break. Jeff Kaplan stated in a 2006 interview with the New York Times, "This is the first time we've really put all the power in the hands of players. You'll see multiple Uber guilds engaged in some massive collective farming." And immediately, we can see the consequences on server economies as players had a choice to make. You could use materials to further your professions, you could hand them into the war effort, or you could put them up in the auction house at hyper-inflated prices. It even got beyond the scope of just the faction's auction house. Take the neutral auction house, for example. Items easier to farm by one faction would instead be listed on the neutral auction house, often at lower prices, so that the server could progress. Of course, though, no amount of preparation would suffice if the collected forces of Azeroth could not unlock the gate itself. As of the launch of patch 1.8, Barstolf of the Shifting Sands appeared in Silithus, and he asked players to find the Brood of Nozdormu in Tanaris, saying that he had to be certain whether the Master had returned before proceeding. Players would indeed discover the bronze dragon Anachronos in front of the Caverns of Time. This dragon would, of course, attack anyone foolish enough to come close, but this confirmation, the confirmation of his presence, would be enough. "There is no time to waste," he would say. "A hero must be found. The task I give will require an army to complete, but only one may rise from the throng of would-be champions." He urged the adventurer to gather their champions, to delve into Blackwing Lair, and to slay a Lash Layer. His head was needed to complete the quest, but only one raid member could loot the head, with the item text reading, "Only one may rise." Returning this head would grant the aspiring champion reputation with the Brood of Nozdormu faction. Now, you'd actually be considered hated still, but it was obvious that something would happen once you gained the favor of the Dragonflight. And to this end, reputation would be gained by collecting and handing in Silithid carapace fragments, 200 at a time. Now, this repeatable quest was the only avenue for reputation until you reach neutral, and that amounted to 195 hand-ins, almost 40,000 carapace fragments. Upon becoming neutral, Anachronos would deem the champion worth talking to, and he would fill them in on the War of the Shifting Sands. Now, the Scarab Wall enclosing Qiraji had been constructed by the Dragonflights, and it had been locked with the Scepter of the Shifting Sands. A crystalline tier at the gates of Qiraji would replay the final moments of the War of the Shifting Sands. In his grief and rage, Fandral Staghelm destroyed that scepter. He shattered it into 3 shards. These shards were then given to a guardian from the red, blue, and green Dragonflights. Disastrously, though, each guardian had become corrupted, so now the champion and the server population at large knew how to open the gate, how to open the Scarab Wall. The scepter, so callously destroyed by Fandral, would need to be reconstructed. The first fragment was held by Irenicus, a green dragon driven mad in his pursuit of Hakar the Soul Flayer. If the champion approached the Shade of Irenicus in the Sunken Temple, Malfurion would appear, telling them to seek out Tyrande. Then, Malfurion, Remulos, and Tyrande hatched a plan to lure the dragon out of the Emerald Dream and into Moonglade, where they would then cleanse him. Now, this actual fight would take a whole raid group, and it really was quite a balancing act, because not only would Moonglade need to be defended to actually get the job done, but Irenicus had to be kept alive long enough for Tyrande to arrive at Moonglade to cleanse him. And once freed, everyone in the server would receive the emote, Irenicus, Tyrant of the Dream, is wholly consumed by the light of Illum. Tranquility sets in over Moonglade. And with that, the player would collect their first scepter shard. The next shard was held by Veilstress. A raid would need to be organised, and upon reaching the dragon, he would inform the champion that Nefarian had taken the shard and would destroy it in 5 hours. A time constraint was then placed on the raid, and if you failed to defeat Nefarian in time, he would send a letter to you reading, "While you have slain me, you have done so in such a slow and disorderly fashion that I have had enough time to write this letter after I destroyed your only hope of saving this world. The crushed red crystal powder is all that is left of your scepter shard. But if you killed him quickly enough, the second shard would be yours." The final fragment was held by Azuragos, was being the operative word. You see, 500 years into his guardianship, he gave it to a minnow. Now, Azuragos did have a magical draconic ledger, which actually could be used to summon the minnow, but the problem was, no one could actually read the ledger. So, the champion had to consult Naren Soothfancy, a gnome scholar near Steamweedle Port. Now, he didn't know how to read the ledger either, but he set the champion off on a mission to find his scrying goggles, a volume of Draconic for Dummies, and a 500-pound chicken. Now, these could be done in any order, but finding each of them was a pretty lengthy process. First, the goggles would drop from Molten Core trash mobs, a bit more simple. Second, the book appeared to have been left behind on a remote island off the coast of Tanaris. Getting there was actually impossible without drowning from fatigue, so the champion would need to deliver a love poem to a Naga sea witch, which in return would get them a swim speed buff. Now, once on the island, it became apparent, though, that the search for the book was far from over, because to complete the book, the champion had to go on a treasure hunt across Azeroth. In fact, 2 of the sections of the book were located in Stormwind and Undercity. Of course, this meant that the champion would have to assemble a raid on the capital city of the opposing faction. Quite the endeavour indeed. Then the final step is to find a 500-pound chicken for fish bait, and then gathering the materials for a very costly Arcanite boy. Now, a 500-pound chicken, that's not really a thing, so Naren would have the champion make a stopgap facsimile out of chimera meat. After casting the Arcanite boy into the Bay of Storms in Ashara, it became apparent that the minnow was actually a shark. Now, this was a relatively straightforward encounter, especially considering this would have been done by guilds that thus far had been regularly completing 40-man content. event. So, at the end of this rather convoluted quest chain, the champion would indeed finally claim their blue shard. And at long last, the champion would return to Anachronos, who proclaimed, "1,000 years have passed, and just as it was fated, one stands before me, one who shall lead their people to a new age. The old god trembles, oh yes, it fears your faith, shatter the prophecy of Cthulhu." With all the preparations being made, the war supplies would take 5 days to reach Silithus via Zeppelin. Then, all that was left to do was the scepter bearer to complete the quest, bang a gong. Hundreds of guilds and thousands of players would gather for the gate to be opened, and once it was, for the next 10 hours, undulating masses of Silithid and Qiraji would pour forth from the gate. General Rajax led them, along with his hulking Anubisath and the elite Qiraji, and it would take the combined efforts of hundreds of players present to defeat them. Everyone who completed their scepter within this 10-hour period would receive the prestigious Black Qiraji Resonating Crystal and the Scarab Lord title. Truly legendary rewards to this day. Even players who didn't initially appreciate the significance of the gate opening would soon be aware, with news passing quickly that world bosses had even appeared in Ungoro and Tanaris. Now, these bosses had mechanics such as a 500-yard knockback that could kill dozens of players at a time. Players undergeared and leveled who came for the spectation, well, they were quickly destroyed, with the responsibility of clearing the Qiraji left to the most organized players present. Blizzard certainly did learn lessons about funneling players, though, from this, because, well, the capabilities of their server hardware were pushed to the limit, with crashes being extremely widespread. This wasn't even contained to Silithus. In fact, whole continents would crash, leaving players actually unable to travel. It was a quite wonderful, memorable event. It was the culmination of so much work, but in true vanilla WoW fashion, it was a messy endeavor indeed. This patch launched on the 3rd of January 2006, and the gates first opened 20 days later on US server Medivh, with Europe's first gate opening being on the 30th of January. Now, this was such an important event for people to attend that it actually led to extreme strife on US server Illidan. The Gong affair was precipitated by the gate being opened before all the server's guilds could gather for it, even those guilds who had labored towards its completion. And this led to the social blacklisting of several guilds on the server, really bringing home what Jeff Kaplan said, that the power of this event was in its player-driven nature. Blizzard gave players the bare bone systems and a bit of direction via the quest, but they ultimately left the start of Vanilla's largest event in the players' hands. This was an incredible task that encompassed the entirety of Azeroth, and it had players globe-trotting with a determination that really would be hard to recreate. The Anchorage effort was idiomatic, truly, of the World of Warcraft of 2006. And to that end, it would be the last time the Blizzard would attempt something so significant or genre-defining, but they undoubtedly would take lessons into the future development of the game. So there you go. That is the entire Gong affair, the opening of the Scarab Gate. A pretty darn incredible event, one that they really have not topped since in terms of its ambition and scope, and in many ways for good reason, because, yeah, their servers could actually barely handle what they tried to pull off. So, that's it for this episode. If you would like to check out the next one, then, hey, hit up the Patreon, it's there now, and a massive thank you to those patrons. They really are the backbone of what we do. Over there, you can get Death Knight month in December, along with our art book, which I will be able to show you very soon indeed, and it's more than just an art book. There's a lot of insights there, design. I mean, I actually think a lot of really interesting stuff to learn that you could actually apply to your own business if you're, sort of in the art world or you're doing that kind of thing. So, a massive thank you to them. Check out the next episode, and with that, I will see you next time.